Chapter 2. A Daring Theft. Nancy and Ned reread the mysterious note several times, trying to figure out its meaning. Maybe the word trellis refers to the one we saw the man start to climb, Nancy said. Yes, and it's on the east side of the house, Ned added. The man in the black cloak was looking up at the second-floor windows of the library, Ned. Does that suggest anything? A robbery? This note must mean that there are valuables worth plenty of cash for any thief who climbs that trellis. How do you interpret the second sentence of the message? Ned asked. In case of rain, every cloud has a silver lining. In case. Silver! The silver miniatures in the glass case! Nancy exclaimed. You've hit it! Ned cried out. I'll bet they intend to pull a job here tonight. At any minute. We'll have to work fast to stop them. Ned, station yourself at the trellis and keep watch. I'll rush up to the library. Better notify the police. As soon as I can, Nancy assured him. There's a telephone in the library. I hope the wires haven't been cut. The two separated. Nancy looked quickly about the ballroom, hoping to see some of her friends, a member of the Hendricks family or Linda Seeley. But not one person who might have aided her was in sight. Nancy ran swiftly up the circular stairway. The moment was a critical one, but the lively young detective had always been able to think fast in an emergency. Nancy's first case had been the secret of the old clock. Since then, Nancy had helped countless persons and faced many dangers, including her previous adventure, Mystery at the Ski Jump. As Nancy reached the first landing, beyond view of the ballroom, she was stopped short. Confronting her was a feminine masquerader in a glittering Javanese costume. Is this the woman who was supposed to be wearing a black velvet hooded mask? Nancy wondered. Now she had on a black lace mask, probably the one Nancy had lost. For an instant, the two stared at each other. Nancy caught a glimpse of piercing dark eyes and a cruel mouth. Then the lights went out. At that instant, the woman seized Nancy in a strong grasp and thrust a hand over the girl's mouth. Nancy struggled frantically to free herself, while in the ballroom below there were calls and cries of alarm. The woman tried to rip off Nancy's mask, but instinct told the young detective to hold on to it. Then, as suddenly as she had been seized, Nancy was released. The woman raced down the stairs and disappeared into the darkness. Recovering her breath, Nancy removed the mask and groped her way to the second floor. Suddenly, the lights went on, and Nancy hurried along the hall. Before she reached the library, a maid came running from it. "Help! Police!" she screamed. "The house has been robbed!" Nancy stopped the frightened girl, advising her to be quiet and not cause a panic on the crowded floor below. "Quick," she urged the maid. "Tell me what happened. Did a thief break into the library?" "Yes, a few minutes ago. Through the window. I had my back turned. Suddenly a hand was clapped over my mouth. A blindfold was slipped over my eyes. My hands were tied quick as a flash, and I was gagged." "How did you get free?" "I managed to work the rope off my wrists just as the lights went on. But everything's been taken except the wall paintings." "The silver miniatures, too?" "Yes, miss. All that could be carried." "Which way did the thief go?" "I couldn't say. He went as quietly as a cat." "It was a man? Not a woman in a Javanese costume?" "She was the lookout, I think. Before I was grabbed, I saw her wandering around." From the maid's account, Nancy knew that the daring robbery had been well planned. Undoubtedly, the masquerader who had seized her on the landing had been stationed there to see that the thief made a successful getaway under cover of darkness. Though convinced that it was too late to capture any member of the bold gang, Nancy sped downstairs. Reaching the garden, she called Ned's name. His answering shout informed her that he was still on guard at the trellis. "What happened?" "What happened?" "What happened?" he demanded as she ran up. "I saw the lights go off." "The house has been robbed." "The library?" "Yes, and the thieves have escaped." "No one has come down the trellis since I've been here." "Then the thief got away before you went on guard, or he slipped out of the house while the lights were off," Nancy declared, and then added, "What's this?" She stared at a tiny piece of cloth which had been snagged on a protruding nail in the trellis. "It must have torn from that man's cloak," Nancy exclaimed as she removed it. "Ned, it's a good clue. Come on! Let's see if the thief is still here." Re-entering the house, Nancy and Ned looked around, but he was not among the guests, who now had removed their masks. The couple learned that Linda Seeley had summoned the police. The girl was deeply distressed, fearful that the Hendricks family might blame her for what had taken place. "I was afraid that this very thing would happen," she moaned. "If only the Hendricks had allowed a closer check of the guests." Nancy and Ned instigated a search of both the house and grounds, but as they had expected, no trace was found of the woman in Javanese garb or the man in the black robe. An empty parking space near the entrance to the house indicated that they had probably left by automobile. The scream of a siren announced the arrival of a police car. Lieutenant Kelly and Detective Ambrose, whom the Drews knew well, inspected the library, affirming that the thief had entered through the second-story window. From information provided by Nancy and the maid, it was obvious that the man had been aided by at least 2 accomplices inside the house, probably the woman in the Javanese costume and someone in the basement who had turned off the lights. The police checked the 3 areas for fingerprints. Afterward, they listened attentively when Nancy and Ned told their story and showed the note, the piece of cloth, and the velvet mask. Then Ambrose went off. Lieutenant Kelly said, "Nancy, we're certainly obliged to you for this evidence. You say that man you danced with had on a mask like this one?" "Yes. Would you mind letting me borrow it? I'm interested in the case and would like to look the mask over for clues. I'll bring it to headquarters any time you say." "I'll have to ask the chief about that," Kelly said. "For you, he might do it." The officer went to the telephone and returned a short time later. "Okay, Nancy," he said. "I'll photograph the mask and you sign for it." He pulled out a notebook and wrote a receipt, which Nancy signed. "The chief says he'll appreciate your help on this case," Kelly added, smiling, "and we'll let you know when we need the mask." In the meantime, his assistant, Detective Ambrose, a brusque young man, had gone to look for Linda Seeley. He brought her to the group. "You're in charge of this party?" he asked. "Yes, officer," Linda replied. "That is, I am in the absence of Mr. Tombar. At the last minute, he had other business to attend to, so he asked me to substitute for him." "We would like you to answer some questions," Detective Ambrose said sternly. "But of course, you do not have to do so without first consulting a lawyer." Linda turned pale. "I'll answer," she said. "I have nothing to hide." The detective shot rapid-fire questions at the frightened girl. Who was Mr. Tombar? What company had arranged the party? What precautions had been taken to guard the valuables? Why hadn't invitations been checked more carefully? As the questions became more pointed, Linda answered them hesitantly. Suddenly, Ambrose said, "You'd better come along to headquarters." "You're accusing me of the theft?" Linda gasped. "I had nothing to do with it." Bursting into tears, the girl ran to Nancy. "Don't let them take me to jail," she pleaded. "I'm sure," said Nancy, "that Miss Seeley did not commit the robbery. Early in the evening, she told me she was worried because there were so many more people here than had been invited.
"Is this true, Mrs. Hendrick?"
Ambrose asked. "Yes, it is," the hostess replied. "We were very foolish not to have taken Miss Seeley's advice about asking our guests to show invitations." Ambrose thought this over, then glanced at Nancy.
"If you say this girl is all right, we'll take your word for it," he said.
"Then come along, Linda," Nancy said, linking arms with her. "Ned and I will drive you home." After they picked up their wraps, Gloria Hendrick walked with them to the front door. She smiled kindly at the distressed girl. "We know it isn't your fault, Linda," she said, "but we have suffered a dreadful loss, and the party's ruined. Oh, Nancy, I wish you'd work on the case and help us get back our valuable miniatures. Will you?" "I'll do what I can," Nancy answered. On the way home, Nancy asked Linda if anyone had rented a black cloak from her company. "I don't think so, although several people at the party did rent costumes from us." "And masks?" "Yes, but not like the one you're carrying." When Nancy reached home, she said goodnight to Ned. He reminded her of the dance to be given by his cousin Helen Tyne on the 28th.
"I'll be here early to pick you up."
"I'll be ready." Nancy's father had waited up for her in his den. When she related the strange events at the party, Mr. Drew frowned. "Here's the black velvet hood, which the police let me borrow," she concluded, handing it to her father. "I have a hunch it may be an important clue." "How well do you know Linda Seeley?" her father asked. "Not too well," she admitted. "Linda was in a few of my classes." "She may find herself in serious trouble," the lawyer said. "The Leitner Entertainment Company is having legal difficulties. Mr. Leitner, the owner, has appealed to me to defend his firm against several threatened lawsuits." "Who's bringing them?" "Former customers whose homes were robbed during parties arranged by the company. They're demanding that he settle for the losses not covered by insurance. They've given him a couple of weeks to decide. Mr. Leitner insists he's not liable." "You'll defend the firm, Dad?" "I probably will. Before I commit myself, though, I'd like to investigate the company. The trouble is, I'm tied up in an involved real estate litigation. The case will take me out of town." "How about appointing me your assistant?" Nancy proposed. "I'd love to work on the mystery until you're free to take over."
"I suspected as much." Her father chuckled. "All right, Nancy. While I'm away, suppose you check on Mr. Leitner, Linda, and the other employees. Find out what you can."
"I'll do that. First thing," Nancy promised. The Leitner office was situated on a narrow downtown street in River Heights. Early the next morning, Nancy walked to it, and on the pretext of returning the Spanish costumes, asked to see Mr. Leitner. He was a short, slightly built man. "What can I do for you?" he inquired nervously. "I trust you found your costumes satisfactory?" "In every respect, Mr. Leitner. One of your employees, Linda Seeley, selected them." "Linda is a very capable girl," the proprietor remarked. "She's been here only a few months, but she learns fast, and she has clever ideas." Nancy glanced around the room. The office walls were decorated with a variety of weird-looking masks. She complimented Mr. Leitner on his unusual collection, then asked thoughtfully, "You have a great many velvet masks, I suppose?" "Yes. Most of them are kept in the wardrobe rooms. Would you like to see them?" "Very much." Mr. Leitner pressed a buzzer, summoning an employee to show Nancy through the wardrobe rooms. "I wish I had time to take you around myself," Mr. Leitner said regretfully. "I could talk myself hoarse on the subject of masks." Nancy asked if there was any particular historical significance connected with the wearing of black velvet masks. "Oh, yes," he replied. "Many men wore them during the reign of Louis XIV in France.
In that period of terror and political intrigue, it wasn't safe for certain persons to appear on the streets except in disguise. Black velvet hoods were worn, especially with wide-sleeved dominoes or robes.
Do you have some of these robes for rent?
Yes, John will show them to you.
John Dale proved to be an attractive and amiable guide. When they finished the tour of the wardrobe rooms, Nancy broached the subject of black dominoes. She told of having been at the Hendricks Masquerade and dancing with a stranger who was wearing that type of robe. "I've been wondering who he is," she said. "Did you happen to rent such a costume?"
"No, I didn't," John replied. "Everyone who came to me wanted something spectacular. Would you like to see our black cloaks? We have several kinds."
"Yes, I would," Nancy replied, trying to stifle her excitement. It was possible that someone else in the firm had rented the costume to the thief. End of Chapter 2.